Hello, YouTube. So there is now a land war in Europe, um, in very familiar World War II terrain. And it's actually fairly close to where I am. So, yeah, I'm currently in Prague. The nearest border, put it roughly on the scale of America, that's the nearest part of Ukraine, which, when I was in America, that sort of, drive along the Great Lakes or would drive across New Mexico, that sort of thing. So the air smells different. Of course, nothing's changed, but it's just, it feels different when there is a war to the east. There's also, we've got both Ukrainians and Russians working in the lab. Um, and the Ukrainian guy, his family was actually in Kharkiv. Uh, it, so, yeah, these names, all the stuff that I know about this neck of the woods, I know from World War Two, so for me, it was always Kiev and Kharkov, which the guy who actually lives in Ukraine has now told me actually those are the Russian pronunciations. The Ukrainian ones are Kiev and Kharkiv. Um, anyway, his parents were in Kharkiv and they've since fled somewhere. I didn't catch quite the details, but the general thing is you want to be anywhere apart from the bit that's occupied by the Russians. Now, it's not going too well in as far as I can tell, they tried to capture an airport to, sort of blitzkrieg Kiev, take an airport, drive a load of troops in, seize power, that sort of thing. And as far as I can tell, they were directly repelled from the airport, which doesn't speak well to how this is likely to pan out for Putin. But yeah, why he's doing this is like God only knows. I mean, the timing is fairly obvious in that Belarus is a very almost puppet state of Moscow at the moment. Of course, he been nicked Crimea a few years back, which is Crimea is mostly wasteland, apart from the really important port city of Sevastopol. Um, but anyway, yeah. So if you actually take a look at Ukraine, it's almost entirely surrounded anyway. And yeah, this guy from Ukraine was showing me all this sort of propaganda stuff from the Russian TV shows, or the Russian Fox News, where they were sort of saying that, well, this bit. Yeah, it used to be Russian, and this bit was given to Ukraine by Russia, and this bit used to be Poland or some other empire, and blah blah blah. So only this bit is really Ukraine. And in order to do this, they had to basically scroll the clock back. I think like 500 or 1,000 years or something stupid like that. And yeah, the second you start talking about land rights that go back that far in Europe, it gets. I mean, remind me, weren't there Germans in Volgograd, as it's now called? It used to be Stalingrad. That's basically how far the Nazis got. It's like, does that mean that this all used to be German? It's like, no, you don't. By the time you're citing 500 or 1,000-year-old land rights in Europe, uh, this just isn't sensible, because almost anyone can claim anything via, with claims that go back this far. Now, of course, there is a sort of common language that common language. It's Slavic. So Czech, Slovak, obviously. Um, Poland, Ukraine, Moscow. They all. I think it stops once you get down to Hungary and Romania, but they have similar but different languages. So I mean, I speak very broken Czech, but nonetheless, that I can make sensible guesses what people in Russian Yeah, that's over-egging it. But yeah, I can pick out words of what they're talking about from general knowledge of Slavic languages. Um, so they do sort of share a sort of common bond. But yeah, the one thing that seems to be very clear is the Ukrainians don't want to be part of Russia. And yeah, given the uh, if they really did have that much trouble taking the airport, this doesn't speak well to Russia's military capability. Incidentally, just so you know, you go up from Kiev there, and you get to Chernobyl, um, which that was also on the news that started leaking again. It's bullshit. Chernobyl's uh, you're not going to get any leaks out of that. Um, but yeah, so their projection of military power isn't really. I mean, it's true that they have a lot more heavy weapons than Ukraine, but if you take a look at this sort of historically, and let's just put this on to GDPs. And so here you've got America at the top with some 20 odd trillion GDP. And roughly all of these countries, they spend 2-3% of their cash on military. So, GDP is basically scales with the size of the military. And you take a look at how far down here you've got to get to Russia. And Russia is the size of Canada, smaller than Canada. 1.5 trillion ish dollars. And yeah, America with 20 odd trillion, they struggle to occupy countries like Iraq and Afghanistan. To win the war, this is not so bad. To actually win the hearts and minds and convince people that you're not just some invading power, this is a lot trickier. And yeah, so America struggled with that sort of military budget to sensibly occupy. Okay, I mean, you can argue that you can do this with an iron fist, but if you do that, the one thing is certain is you will never be friends with the Ukrainian people, which seems to be kind of Putin's delusional plan. Is he's going to put back together the USSR? I mean, his goals just don't make sense. It's and you have to be very careful about trying to making the erroneous assumption that everyone is operating on a sane and rational basis. Because in this case, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, you take a look at Putin's excuses for going in. And the first was he masses, was it 200,000 troops on the border, which he says is just an exercise. And then, just shortly after that, or during that military exercise, he decides to recognize these two states down here as independent republics or something like that. And then, of course, it turns out these two little republics claim that, virtually all the rest of Ukraine belongs to them. And so, and then it's just like, yeah, whatever, a full-fledged invasion under this really bizarre, I mean, it really is the ultimate gaslighting, that there's neo-Nazis in Ukraine, and that he has to get rid of the neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Like, and this is now his reason for invading. So, I mean, none of this makes even the slightest bit of sense. And I've yet to come across anyone who is even remotely convinced by this. Apparently, in Russia, there are an awful lot of people. Putin is, kind of Trump in America, in Trump in Russia, in that he is very popular and he's seen as the strong man and no one tells him what to do, blah, blah, blah. And facts be damned. Yeah, they're not they're just not relevant to the argument. If Putin's doing it, then it's the right thing to do. So, but even at that, it's also similar to Trump support in that only half the people have this sort of misty-eyed sort of hero worship, and the other half don't. And yeah, so it's not a popular. Well, there's a lot of people who support Putin, but also an awful lot who don't. And yeah, in Ukraine, you really have to struggle to find anyone who speaks highly of this. Anyway, like I was saying, coming back to GDPs and what countries can you sensibly occupy. Russia is a factor of 20 down-ish, not quite 20, down on America's budget, which will approximately equate to the difference in the military budget. Now, Ukraine's a lot further down. Here we go. So, Ukraine and Iraq are comparable in GDPs. It's about 200 billion a shot. I think that works out to 150. But with Ukraine, you got to bear in mind that their population's 40 million. Russia is 150, 160, that sort of thing. So you're going to multiply that by about 4 if you want to do it per capita to compare it to Russia. So the wealth density in Ukraine is about half that of what it is in Russia. But if you're going for absolute numbers, it's about 10 times smaller, which is it's not so good if you're doing sort of invasion style stuff. But like I was saying, you're talking about trying to invade and hold a country that is bloody massive. It's unlikely that that's going to be successful unless you are genuinely liberating the country. And I'm not so sure that's the way this is going to pan out. So, and then of course, if you really want to be, right. So what Putin is doing here, war in Europe. I just can't. Well, where the hell did this come from? But thus far, if you want to be simply objective by the numbers, it is still likely, if you come to the coronavirus deaths, the coronavirus is still killing massively more people than the war between Russia. I mean, they were talking about 150 Russians had died or something. Even if it's in the thousands. Currently in Russia, they're having about 5,000 a week die from coronavirus. All right, these are mostly old people. It's not the same. I know it's not the same, but and Ukraine is also pretty high. Ukraine is actually per capita worse than Russia. So, I think it's important. I mean, this is almost universally true. Diseases kill more people than wars. In fact, what kills most people in wars tends not to be the people who get shot by bullets. It's the destruction of infrastructure. So, and it can be up to like 10 to 1 or something. So, in Iraq, Iraq. Most of the people died because a load of the water treatment plants were destroyed, or power plants, that sort of thing. And all of a sudden, if you don't have power, all of a sudden hospitals become mostly useless. They can't do any of the sophisticated stuff that they used to do to save lives. And likewise with water, you lose your sanitation on the water and you get a lot of people die like that. And that tends to be a lot more damaging than the bullets. Now, at the moment, the amount of damage, that's been done to Ukraine seems to be very modest. And this is the other thing: modern wars are expensive. There is this thing that, yeah, if you were in World War Two, it was you had plants churning out fighting machines, Spitfires or whatever, and they would go to the front and they would get, they would have a fairly short shelf life of months, maybe a year, that sort of thing. And you would have factories churning them out basically at the same rate they were being destroyed. Now, this just isn't possible with modern warfare. You lose your frontline strength of, super, stealth fighters, that sort of thing. It'll take the best part of 10 years to build some more. And yeah, this likewise goes with Russia. You might have a modern military, but guys with anti-tank missiles are actually fairly lethal against tanks these days. What sorted out the Russians in Afghanistan is when the Americans started giving them Stinger missiles. Before then they had these huge gunships, Hind gunships, that would go and sort of blast. They're basically indestructible to small arms fire. And all of a sudden, once the Afghans had Stinger missiles, well, then they basically became a liability. They were, flying death traps. So, if it comes down to fighting with modern weapons, these things can become unsustainable very quickly. And if it's a bloody occupation, well, I mean, the Russian army is mostly conscripts. Which was also the problem that they had in Afghanistan, is that people whose hearts really aren't in it tend not to fight so much. Meanwhile, people who are sat there, actually fighting for their hometown, they'll put up a fight. And this is where you're watching the news today, where they're just basically handing out handing out machine guns for free. This makes the idea of trying to occupy a country like this, a complete bloody nightmare. I mean, even you just look at it on the sheer numbers. Russia, population 150 million. Ukraine, population 40 million. That's an awful big country to try and occupy like that. Anyway, so those are just some thoughts on Ukraine, and I'll see you next time. Ciao.